A wartime story told by Ivan Matveev. I was an old man when I finally agreed to talk. By then my hands were no longer hands but maps of dried rivers' blue veins, broken knuckles, scars that refused to fade. A young man from the city came to see me. A journalist, he said, or a historian. I didn't remember later. They all looked the same. Clean fingers, clever eyes, a notebook that waited like an open mouth. He sat at my kitchen table in front of a chipped mug of weak tea and asked, "Tell me how you survived the camp." I looked at his hands first. No burns, no frostbite, no rope marks. And yet he wanted to understand. You cannot understand, I thought, but I also knew someone has to remember. So I nodded, took a breath that felt like lifting a stone from my chest, and started from the beginning. Chapter 1. The Last Letter Home. The year was 1941. We were stationed not far from Vitebsk, or what was left of it after the first bombardments. The earth itself smelled of smoke, twisted metal, and fear. I was 23. And still thought that courage meant not showing you were afraid. That evening, I sat on an ammunition crate, my back against a half-burned birch tree, and wrote a letter to my wife. My dear Anna, forgive me that my words come on this dirty, torn paper. It's all I could find. I'm alive. I'm healthy. Don't worry about me. We're holding the line. Tell our little son that his father will come back and bring him a wooden horse. I promise. My hand shook, not from cold, but from the weight of that last sentence. Promised. Such a big word for such a small man. Around me, the men of our unit laughed, smoked, argued. Someone played a harmonica. Another cursed him for playing too loud. The sky was red in the distance, where the front line burned like a long, uneven scar. "Vanya, what are you writing?" It was Sergei, my closest friend in the unit, a broad-shouldered boy from Smolensk with a permanent grin. "A letter to my wife," I answered. He sat beside me, peered at the paper, and sighed. "Right. Don't worry. We'll chase Hitler all the way back to Berlin," he said. "I'm not sure I should promise that either," I replied, forcing a smile. He clapped me on the shoulder. "You think too much. War doesn't like thinkers." If he knew how right he was. I folded the letter carefully, as if the paper could feel pain, and slid it into my breast pocket. We had no guarantee it would ever leave the front, but writing was our way of pretending there was a future. That night, I fell asleep with the letter against my heart. By morning, the world had changed. Chapter 2. Encirclement. We woke up to artillery, not ours. The sky pulsed with distant flashes, each followed by a delayed growl that crawled across the fields toward us. The ground shook under my boots as I ran to my position. Our commander shouted orders. "Positions, quickly! They're pushing from the west and the north. We hold or we're cut off." We were already cut off. We just didn't know it yet. The attack came in waves, tanks, trucks, infantry. We fired until our rifles grew hot, until our shoulders were bruised from the recoil. Men shouted, screamed, fell. The smell of cordite, burning fuel and blood mixed into something that still visits me in dreams. At some point, our artillery fell silent. "No more shells," someone yelled. We were alone. The Germans moved around us like water around a stone. Bit by bit, our lines shrank. Every time I reloaded, they were closer. Every time I blinked, I saw someone I knew lying in the grass, not moving. "Fall back," came the order. But there was nowhere to fall back to. We tried anyway. We retreated through a small forest, branches slashing at our faces, shells exploding nearby. I remember the peculiar calmness I felt when a tree next to me split in half, showering me with splinters, as if death had brushed my shoulder and kept walking. By evening, the shooting quieted, not because the battle was won, but because it was over. We were surrounded. Chapter 3. The Moment of Capture. We spent the night in a shallow ditch, shivering under our coats, listening. No one slept. You don't sleep when you know that dawn might not be for you. At first light, we heard engines, dogs, and shouted commands in German. The forest around us came to life not with birds, but with men hunting other men. Our ammunition was nearly gone. Our food was gone a day earlier. Our strength, that had started to leave even before. Our commander gathered the 20 or so men that were left from our company. His voice was hoarse. "We can try to break through, but look at you. Half of you can't even stand. They'll mow you down in seconds. I won't order you to die pointlessly." He paused, swallowed his pride like a bitter pill. "You have families, wives, children. Think of them now. If we surrender, maybe some of us will live." Surrender. For a Soviet soldier, the word tasted like poison. Sergei whispered in my ear, "What do you think, Vanya?" I looked at him. His face was pale, eyes red-rimmed, but he still had that crooked half-smile. "I think," I said slowly, "I want to see my son again." We raised a white cloth, a piece of shirt tied to a stick. It looked ridiculous, fragile, almost shameful against the black trunks of the trees. The Germans came out of the forest with rifles raised, fingers on triggers. Their expressions were blank, professional. They looked at us the way a butcher looks at animals that have stopped struggling. We were ordered to kneel, hands behind our heads. One soldier walked down the line counting, another checked our pockets, ripping away watches, letters, photographs. A blond German with cold eyes yanked the letter from my breast pocket. "That's my wife's," I said automatically, in Russian. He didn't understand, of course. He crumpled the letter and tossed it into the mud. I watched it fall, the paper darkening in the wet earth. It felt like watching my own heart thrown away. They could have shot us then and there. Some units did, but ours, it seems, decided we were more useful alive. We were prisoners now. At the time I thought, I'm still breathing. That means I'm lucky. I didn't yet know that sometimes survival is the cruelest punishment. Chapter 4. March into Nowhere. Prisoners don't walk. They are driven. They lined us up in a column and started moving us westward. Any man who faltered was reminded, with a rifle butt, that he was expected to keep his place. The first day, we walked on shaking legs, still fueled by adrenaline and shock. The second day, pain settled into our bones. The third day, people began to fall. No water, except what we could scoop from muddy ditches when the guards got bored and let us drink. No food, except the occasional crust of bread tossed into the crowd like something thrown to animals at a zoo. A man from another unit walked beside me, muttering his wife's name over and over like a prayer. Olga, Olga, Olga. On the fourth day, his voice stopped mid-syllable. I turned my head and saw him on his knees, hands clutching his chest. No one stepped out of the column to help him. We didn't need the guard's example to know the price, a shot behind us. We kept walking. My feet were blisters inside torn boots. Every step felt like stepping on broken glass. My lips cracked and bled. My throat was a dry, burning tunnel. Once, we passed a well near a village. The smell of cold, clean water seemed to wrap itself around my brain. I took an involuntary step toward it. The nearest guard raised his rifle lazily and fired a shot into the ground at my feet. "Whiter!" he shouted. "Move!" I moved. After a while, you stop thinking in words. You become an animal that knows only forward, forward, forward. Chapter 5. The Camp Gate. We arrived at the camp at dusk. I didn't know its name then. Later, I would hear the guards call it Dulag something, a transit camp. For us, it was simply hell with barbed wire. The first thing I noticed was the smell, not just of latrines and unwashed bodies, but of something heavier, sweeter, rotting. It hung in the air like an invisible fog. The second thing was the silence, not complete silence. The moans, coughs, and occasional cries were there, but a kind of muted, resigned stillness, like the sound had given up. The gate was a rectangle of iron bars topped with barbed wire. Above it, a wooden sign with German words I couldn't read. Perhaps it said, "Welcome." It didn't matter. As we passed inside, a guard with a thin mustache counted us and shouted numbers to a man with a clipboard. We had left more behind us than they wrote down. Inside, there were long, low barracks, each with a sagging roof, blackened windows, and doors that hung crookedly. The ground was churned into mud, mixed with straw and other things you didn't want to identify. "Form lines! Strip!" The command came in broken Russian. We stripped our coats, our boots, our belts. Some tried to hide small keepsakes, rings, photos, medals. The guards searched us like wolves sniffing out meat. They took everything. A young soldier with fair hair found a small cross around one man's neck. He laughed, tore it off, and tossed it into a pile of confiscated items. "Your God won't help you here," he said in German, and although none of us spoke his language, we all understood. Then came the lice. We were pushed into a room where our hair was cut roughly, clippers tearing at our scalps. The floor was covered with matted hair. Clothes were fumigated with some chemical that burned the nose and then thrown back at us, sometimes not even the same clothes we had given up. As I pulled my shirt over my head, I felt something crawling on my skin. Lice. They were our new companions. They sent us to Barrack 3. The air inside was thick and damp. Wooden bunks stood 3 levels high, covered with filthy straw. Men lay there like stacked firewood. Some turned their heads to look at us. Most didn't. I climbed onto a free space on the middle tier. The man next to me was little more than a skeleton with eyes. He stared at me for a long moment and then said, "First time in a camp?" "Yes," I answered. "Don't worry," he said with a bitter smile. "You'll get used to it, or you'll die before you do." I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, smelling unwashed bodies, listening to coughs and mutters. In that moment I realized the front was over for me. The war had not ended. It had simply changed shape. Chapter 6. Interrogation. They called me for interrogation on the 3rd day. A guard banged on the barrack door and shouted my name with a twisted accent. "Matveev! Ivan!" I climbed down from the bunk, my legs shaking. Men watched me with pity, some with expectation. Interrogation meant beatings. Beatings meant maybe an extra piece of bread sometimes. Everything was a gamble. They led me to a small building near the gate. Inside, it was strangely clean. A table, 2 chairs, a bare light bulb swinging gently from the ceiling. Behind the table sat an officer with a pale, thin face and small, round glasses. He had the kind of eyes that didn't blink often. There was a translator next to him, a Russian who wore a German uniform without shame. "Sit," the officer said in German. The translator repeated in Russian. I sat. He opened a folder, glanced at it, and then at me. Name? Ivan Matveev. Rank? Private. Unit, I told him. How many were in your company? Where is your division now? Who commanded you? What kind of artillery support did you have? The questions came like hammer blows. I answered the ones I could without giving away anything important. After a while, he started to repeat himself, asking the same things in different ways. Why did you surrender? He suddenly asked through the translator. There was no good answer to that question. Because we had no ammunition? Because we wanted to live? Because we were afraid? I followed my commander's order, I said. He took off his glasses and wiped them carefully with a handkerchief. You Russians, he said in German, are very bad at choosing whom to obey. The translator smiled thinly as he repeated it. Then came the part without words. They made me stand. 2 guards entered. The officer nodded. The first blow with the rubber truncheon caught me in the stomach. I folded over, air leaving my lungs like a deflating bellows. Stand up, the translator said calmly. We're not done. I stood up. They hit me again and again. Not too hard, not enough to break bones, just enough to teach. The lesson was simple. From now on, my life depended entirely on their will. After what felt like hours, the officer raised a hand. The guards stopped. You will work, the translator said. You will obey. You will not try to escape. If you do, you will be shot. If you behave, maybe you will live to see the end of the war. Maybe. He leaned closer. But remember this, Ivan Matveev, no one is coming for you. Your country considers you dead already. That was the worst blow of all, because a small voice inside me whispered, maybe he's right. Chapter 7. The man from Leningrad, back in the barrack, every inch of my body ached. I climbed onto my bunk, swallowing groans. When I closed my eyes, I saw not the officer's face, but Anna's, blurred by time and distance. Here, a voice beside me said, eat this. I opened my eyes. A piece of bread was held out to me, dark, heavy, small as a child's fist. It belonged to the man who lay next to me. I had barely looked at him before. He was just another shape in the dusk. Now I saw he was perhaps in his 40s, with intelligent eyes and a thin, angular face. His cheekbones stuck out sharply. His hair was already speckled with gray. I can't, I said. You need it yourself. I'm used to hunger, he replied. You won't heal without food. Take it. I hesitated and then accepted. The bread tasted of sawdust and acid, but to me it was sweeter than any cake. I ate slowly, letting each crumb dissolve on my tongue. Thank you, I said. He nodded. My name is Mikhail. I was a school teacher in Leningrad. A teacher? I repeated, surprised. Yes, history and literature. And you? I was a mechanic before the war. A useful man, he said, in peace and in war. He watched me for a moment, then added, You're newly arrived. I can see it in your eyes. They still look at everything, still try to understand. That will go away, or you'll find a way to keep it. But it will hurt. You've been here long? I asked. He sighed. Long enough to lose count of weeks, maybe months. Long enough to see too many men arrive and too few leave. He pointed at my bruised face. Interrogation? Yes. Did you tell them anything? Nothing that could hurt anyone. Good, he said. We've lost enough already. There was a strange calm in his voice. No bravado. No empty heroism. Just a quiet determination like a candle that refuses to go out in a dark room. That night, as I lay on the straw, trying not to move my bruised ribs, I listened to Mikhail talk softly about his students, about books, about a city I had never visited. He spoke of Leningrad's wide avenues, of the Neva River under winter ice, of libraries and theaters and children who believed that history was something in books, not something that could swallow them whole. For a little while, the walls of the barrack faded. The stench receded. I could almost see that distant city. "You'll go back there," I said, "after the war." He smiled sadly. "If I go back, they might not want to see me." "Why? Because I surrendered? Because I'm a prisoner? Do you think they'll welcome us with flowers? No, my friend. They will look at us as if we are traitors who didn't die when we were supposed to." His words cut deep, but he squeezed my shoulder gently. "Still, I want to live," he said, "even if no one is waiting for me. I want to see one more sunrise in my own country. I want to feel Russian snow again, not this foreign mud." "Me too," I whispered. In that moment, in a camp where every man was trying to cling to his own last strength, Mikhail shared his bread and his hope with me. That was the night he became my brother. Chapter 8. Work in the cold. They woke us before dawn, dragging us from the bunks like sacks of flour. Outside, the air bit into exposed skin. Frost had crept into the corners of the camp, painting dirty wood with a thin layer of white. We stood in lines, shivering, while a guard counted us again and again, as if numbers could keep us from disappearing. "Work, commandos!" someone shouted. "Bridge, forest, railway!" Mikhail and I were assigned to the same group. They gave us shovels and picks, tools heavier than some of the men holding them. We were marched to a clearing where they were building something, an extension of a road or a rail line. I didn't understand the purpose. It didn't matter. Our job was simple: move earth, break frozen ground, carry stones. The first time my shovel hit the frozen soil, pain shot up my arms. It was like trying to dig through iron. My breath came in white clouds. My fingers cramped even through the thin gloves. "Use your weight, not just your arms," Mikhail advised between gasps. "Think of it like a dance, a very stupid, painful dance, but still." Despite his words, there was no grace in our movements, just desperation. Guards paced behind us with rifles and whips, shouting whenever someone slowed down. The hours blended into one another. Work, shout, blow on your hands, work again. At midday, they gave us a meal, a thin soup with a few floating grains and something that might once have been a potato. We huddled around the pot like starving animals, each man swallowing as fast as he could before the cold could steal the warmth from the liquid. "Don't drink too fast," Mikhail whispered. "Your stomach will hurt." "My stomach already hurts," I answered. He smiled. "Then at least let it hurt with something inside." By the time the guards finally ordered us to stop, my body no longer felt like mine. My limbs were numb, my back ached, and my hands were covered in blisters that had burst and frozen over. On the way back to the camp, Mikhail stumbled. I grabbed his arm, kept him upright. "Easy," I said. He nodded, breathing hard. "Just saving my strength," he muttered. "I have to live long enough to correct your grammar, Vanya." "Teacher?" I snorted softly. "Even in hell you teach." "That's what we do," he said. "We help people remember they are still human." Chapter 9. Hunger and Stories. Hunger isn't just a feeling in your stomach. It becomes a constant hum in your head, a weight behind your eyes, an ache in your bones. It makes you see bread where there is none, smell food that doesn't exist. In the evenings, After the roll call, we lay on our bunks, staring at the beams above us. The lice crawled along our skin. The straw rustled. Somewhere in the barrack, someone coughed, a rattle that never seemed to end. To distract ourselves from hunger, we told stories. One man described in loving detail the borscht his mother used to make. Another spoke about fishing in the Volga. A third recalled how he once fell in love with a girl who smelled of soap and apples. Mikhail, being a teacher, was our main storyteller. He told us about the Decembrists, about Pushkin and Lermontov, about wars long past, about men who had faced death and did not run. "Do you think they were braver than us?" someone asked once. "No," Mikhail answered. "They just had their own kind of fear. Bravery is not a gift. It is a decision you make each moment, to stand up when everything inside you wants to curl up and disappear." "Then what are we now?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "We are unfinished stories," he said finally. "As long as you breathe, your story isn't over. They can beat you, starve you, strip you of everything, but as long as you keep that tiny spark inside, they haven't won." "Easy for you to say," growled a man on the top bunk. "Teacher, words cost nothing." Mikhail didn't argue. He just looked up at the dark ceiling and said quietly, "You're right. Words cost nothing. That's why they are the only thing they haven't taken away from us." That night, as my empty stomach twisted and my bones protested, even the slight weight of the blanket, I repeated his words to myself. An unfinished story, a tiny spark. Don't let it go out. Chapter 10. Fever. Winter dug its claws deeper into us. The barracks were not heated. Frost formed on the inside of the walls. Our breath hung in the air like ghosts. Men coughed constantly. The sound became a part of the background, like the creak of wood and the murmur of dreams. Then the fever came. At first, it was just one or two men with flushed faces and glassy eyes, shivering even under blankets. Then there were more. "Typhus," someone whispered. The word moved through the barrack like another kind of wind. One night, I woke to find Mikhail sitting upright on his bunk, his eyes unfocused. "Misha," I whispered, "what's wrong?" He turned his head slowly toward me. His face was pale, damp with sweat, but his cheeks burned with small red spots. "Vanya," he said hoarsely, "do you hear the Neva?" "The river?" I frowned. "We're not in Leningrad." He smiled in a strange, distant way. "Of course not. But I hear the ice cracking, children skating, laughing, falling, getting up." He closed his eyes briefly. I must be dreaming sitting up. I touched his forehead. He was burning. "You're sick," I said. "Lie down." "No lessons today, class dismissed," he murmured, trying to joke. Then he slipped back onto the straw, shaking with chills. "The camp doctors, if you could call them that, did nothing. Fever meant weakness. Weakness meant you were sliding down a slope with only one end." I tore a strip from my already torn shirt, soaked it in the snow outside, and pressed it to his forehead. I shared my bread with him, though he could barely swallow. "Save it," he whispered. "You need it." "I need you more," I said stubbornly. "Who else is going to complain about my pronunciation?" He chuckled weakly. "Your Russian is bad enough. I don't even want to imagine your German." The fever dragged on for days. He shook with chills, then burned, then shook again. He muttered in his sleep, sometimes in Russian, sometimes reciting poetry, sometimes calling names I didn't know. Perhaps students, perhaps family. "Tell me about your wife," he said once, in a moment of clarity. "Anna," I said. She has brown hair. She laughs a lot. Too much sometimes. She loves to sing while she cooks. She cries at movies, even comedies. She's stronger than me, I think." "Good," he murmured. "Strong women keep weak men alive." "And you?" I asked. "Are you married?" He was silent that time, his eyes clouded. "I had a daughter," he said eventually. "Her name is Katya. She used to bring me drawings after school, always drew the same thing, a big house with a sun and flowers. I told her one day we'd travel together, see the world." "Where is she now?" I asked. "In Leningrad," he answered, "if she's alive." We both fell silent. Leningrad was already under siege. We had heard rumors, hunger, bombings, death. The world beyond the wire was burning too. I held his hand that night as his fingers grew colder. "Don't sleep," I whispered. "Stay with me." He smiled faintly. "Teacher is tired, Vanya," he said, "but I'll try." Chapter 11. The Last Lesson. It was snowing the morning Mikhail died. Not the soft, gentle snow of December holidays, but a slow, heavy fall of wet flakes that melted into the mud, turning everything into a gray paste. He had been quieter the day before, too quiet. The fever had burned much of his strength. His eyes seemed to look inward more than outward. That morning, roll call dragged on. A man had tried to escape the night before and been caught. They had left his body hanging near the gate as an example. When we staggered back into the barrack, I rushed to Mikhail's bunk. His eyes were half open, staring at the roof. "Misha," I said, touching his shoulder, "I'm here." His lips moved. I bent low to hear. "Vanya," he whispered, "do you remember the poem I told you? And we shall live, but there will be no rest." "Yes," I said, though at that moment I remembered nothing but the sound of his voice. "Listen," he murmured, pausing for breath. If you get out of here, if you go home, and they ask you where you were," he stopped, his chest heaving. "I'll tell them the truth," I said. "I'll tell them you were brave." He smiled faintly. "No, tell them we were human, not numbers, not traitors. Tell them we tried." His fingers grabbed my wrist, surprisingly strong for a moment. "And if," he struggled for words, "if by some miracle you are in Leningrad some day, and you see a girl named Katya Mikhailovna, tell her—" His voice broke. "What should I tell her?" I asked, fighting tears. "Tell her her father loved her very, very much, that he wanted to come home, that he wasn't ashamed of her, or of himself." His eyes filled suddenly. "I don't want her to be ashamed of me, Vanya, that's all." I swallowed hard. "I promise," I said. "I promise you." His grip loosened. His eyes, which had been sharp even in fever, now seemed to look past me. "Good," he whispered. "Then I can rest." He exhaled and did not inhale again. I stayed there, holding his hand, long after his fingers grew completely cold. Around us, men shifted uncomfortably, some turning away. Death was no stranger here, but it never became a friend. A guard eventually came, glanced at him, and shrugged. "One less mouth to feed," he said in German. They dragged his body away like a bag of garbage. I sat on the bunk, staring at the space where he had lain. The barrack felt suddenly enormous and empty, even though it was full of men. For the first time since my capture, I cried, not loudly, not hysterically. Silent tears that burned tracks down my dirty face. Loss in war is like losing pieces of yourself. When Mikhail died, a part of me died with him, but another part, a stubborn part that he had helped keep alive, hardened instead. I promised, I thought, I have to live, if not for myself, then for him. Chapter 12. The Decision. After Mikhail's death, something changed inside me. Before, I had been moving through the days like a man stunned, doing what I was told, hoping vaguely that survival might be enough. Now, I understood. Survival wasn't a gift. It was a task, a duty. The camp routine continued, indifferent to my grief. Roll call, work, hunger, cold, exhaustion. Men died. New men arrived. The guards shouted, laughed, smoked. The machine kept turning. One evening, as we trudged back from another day of back-breaking labor, a man fell into step beside me. He had a narrow face, sharp eyes, and the calm look of someone who observes more than he reveals. "You were close to the teacher," he said quietly. "Yes," I answered. "He was a good man." "He was," I agreed. The man glanced around, making sure no guard was within earshot. "My name is Pavel," he said. "I was a lieutenant before all this. I have friends here. We are tired of waiting to die. We're thinking of doing something about it." I looked at him, not understanding at first. "Doing what?" His eyes met mine. There was a dangerous light in them. "Escaping," he said simply. The word hit me like a blow. Escape. The camp was full of stories about failed attempts. Men caught, beaten, shot, hung, their bodies displayed like gruesome decorations. "It's impossible," I said instinctively. "Maybe," he shrugged, "but so is surviving here for 2 more winters. We're not choosing between life and death, Ivan. We're choosing how we'd rather risk dying." He walked silently for a few steps, then added, "You were a friend of the teacher. That means you have something most of them don't." "What?" I asked. "Reasons," he said. "Men with reasons are useful." That night, I lay on my bunk, staring at the darkness. Every part of my body ached, but my mind raced. Escape. The word stirred something long sleeping inside, a memory of running through fields as a boy, of choosing my own direction, of being more than a number in a line. What would Anna think if she knew I was considering this? Would she want me to risk everything to return to her, or would she prefer me to stay alive in chains rather than die in the snow? And Mikhail, he hadn't told me to escape. He had told me to live. But could I truly live here? By dawn, I had my answer. When Pavel approached me again, I nodded before he even spoke. "I'm in," I said. He smiled as if he had expected nothing else. "Good," he replied. "Then listen carefully." Chapter 13. Planning the Impossible. We did not meet in large groups. That would have been suicide. Instead, plans were whispered in fragments. A sentence here, a phrase there, a tiny detail traded for a piece of bread or a favor. There were 6 of us: Pavel, myself, 2 brothers from Belarus named Stepan, and Oleg, a quiet man called Yuri, and an older sergeant with a broken nose who never gave his real name. "Call me Petrov," he said. "Everyone else does, even when it isn't my name." Pavel had been observing the camp for weeks. He knew the guards' routines, their habits, their laziness. On nights when the officers drink, the guards on the northern side get sloppy. He told us one evening, as we huddled near the latrine, pretending to relieve ourselves. They cluster near the stove and smoke. They walk the perimeter less often. "The northern side is also where the fence is closest to the trees," added Petrov. "Less open ground to cross." "The wire?" Oleg asked. "Even if we get there, the wire is high." "Wire can be cut," Pavel said, "if you have something sharp enough." He looked at me. "Ivan, you worked as a mechanic, didn't you?" "Yes." "You know how to misplace tools." I thought of the workshops where we had been forced to repair carts and vehicles. Tools were counted, but not always by careful men. "I can try," I said. It took days, weeks. In the workshop, I watched where the German mechanics stored their tools, where they were careless, where they rushed. One day, as a guard shouted at two men arguing over a broken wheel, I slipped a small file into my boot. Another day, a piece of metal with a sharp edge found its way into my sleeve. I smuggled them back to the barracks, one by one, hidden in straw or inside my clothes. Stepan, who had once worked as a blacksmith, used a small piece of metal to sharpen the file against a stone, turning it into something that could bite into wire. "We will not cut the whole fence," Pavel explained. "That would take too long. We weakened sections beforehand, so that on the night itself we only need to break a few strands." "And the dogs?" Yuri asked. "We pray they are tired," said Petrov grimly, "or busy chewing on someone else." We chose a night. It would be near the end of winter, when the cold made people careless, but the snow was still thick enough to mask tracks for a while. On that night, officers usually drank in the barracks near the headquarters. The guards would be sleepy, their eyes more on the warmth and the darkness beyond the fence. Between now and then, all we had to do was survive. Chapter 14. The Night of Broken Wire. The day of the escape was like any other. Roll call, work, hunger, exhaustion. If someone had looked closely, maybe they would have noticed that the six of us moved with a different kind of tension, that our eyes flickered more often toward the northern fence line, that our hands shook, not just from cold. But no one looked closely. The camp swallowed men's details. They became faceless, gray shapes. As evening fell, a wind picked up, throwing snow into small swirls. The sky was covered in low, heavy clouds. Good. No moonlight to betray us. Back in the barrack, I lay on my bunk, heart pounding. I could hear my own blood in my ears. Around us, men muttered, coughed, scratched. Some slept. Pavel's voice came from the darkness, low and firm. "When the second guard shift changes," he whispered, "we move. We go out during latrine time. If someone asks, we say we have stomach problems. No one will argue with that. Once outside, we head north, not together, but spaced out. Remember, if one of us is caught, the others keep going. No heroics. We've had enough heroes killed already." "Understood," we murmured. I closed my eyes and saw Anna's face. I saw my son, though I barely remembered his features anymore. He had been so small when I left. I saw Mikhail lying on the bunk, eyes half open. "Watch me," I thought. "I'm trying." The hours crawled by. Then finally, the whistles blew. Guard shift change. "Now," Pavel whispered. We slid from our bunks, one by one, joining the thin trickle of men heading outside to relieve themselves. A guard near the door glanced at us, bored, his breath fogging in the air. We stepped out into the cold. The sky was a low, dark lid above us. The snow crunched softly under our worn boots. One by one, we drifted away from the latrine area, moving as if aimless, as if just stretching legs. No one called out. No one raised an alarm. My heart hammered so hard I felt it might be visible through my shirt. The northern fence loomed ahead, a dark line against the darker trees beyond. The watchtower nearby had a small light, but its cone of visibility did not reach the ground where we were heading. The guard up there was a vague shape, hunched in his coat, perhaps more interested in his cigarette than in shadows. Pavel reached the wire first, dropping to his knees. I followed, then Stepan and Oleg, then Yuri and Petrov. We did not speak. We didn't need to. My fingers closed around the wire. Even through the cloth, I felt its icy bite. The small file in my hand began to rasp softly, eating into metal. Each sound seemed deafening to me, but in reality, it was probably no louder than the rustle of grass. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Time lost meaning. There was only the wire, the file, the dizziness of fear. At one point, the guard in the tower moved. A beam of light swung overhead like a searching eye. We froze, faces pressed into the cold, wet ground. The light moved on. We exhaled silently. Finally, a section of wire gave way under my hands. It sagged slightly. Stepan had already weakened 2 other strands nearby. Pavel leaned close to my ear. "On my count," he whispered. 3, 2, 1, now. We pulled. The wire snapped with a quiet, vicious sound. The opening was not large, but enough for a man to squeeze through if he didn't mind losing some skin. "You first!" Pavel hissed. I slid on my stomach, pushing myself through the gap. The torn edges of wire grabbed at my clothes, scratching my back, my legs. For a moment, I thought I was stuck, like a rabbit in a trap. Then gravity took me, and I rolled onto the snow on the other side. I was outside the camp. For a heartbeat, I lay there, stunned. The forest stretched ahead, dark and silent. I could have cried. "Move!" Petrov's harsh whisper snapped me out of it. One by one, the others wriggled through the opening. Stepan snagged his sleeve and had to rip it, leaving a piece of cloth flapping like a small mocking flag. "Go," Pavel said. "Northeast. Don't run. Walk fast. Running makes noise. Once we hit the trees, we spread out. Then regroup at the creek we saw on work detail last week." We moved. Every step away from the fence felt like a victory and a new danger. Behind us, the camp was a shadow. Before us, the world was unknown. Snow fell silently around us, covering tracks, erasing evidence. For the first time in months, I was outside a barbed wire boundary without a guard behind me. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just kept walking. Chapter 15, The Hunt. We did not get far before the alarm sounded. A siren wailed, tearing through the night. Shouts in German echoed across the field. The tower lights began to swing crazily, searching for shapes. "Faster!" Pavel hissed. "Into the trees, now!" We broke into a stumbling run, snow grabbing at our legs, branches slapping our faces. Behind us, dogs began to bark. The forest swallowed us quickly, but it also slowed us. The underbrush was thick. Fallen branches hid under snow, ready to trip us. I heard a man fall behind me in a muffled curse. Another voice whispered for him to get up. Get up. Gunshots cracked in the distance, sharp as breaking glass. The dog's barking grew louder. I had never felt so heavy, so clumsy. Each breath burned my lungs. My boots, worn and thin, let in the cold until I no longer felt my toes. Left. Petrov's voice came from somewhere to my right. "Stream that way. They'll expect us straight ahead." We veered. Snow-covered bushes tore at our legs. Once, a branch whipped across my face. I felt warmth and knew it had drawn blood. The barking came closer. I heard men shouting orders, the crunch of multiple sets of boots. "Down!" Pavel suddenly whispered. "Everyone down!" We dropped into the snow, trying to make ourselves small behind trees and fallen logs. I pressed my body flat, my face in the cold, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might shake the snow. Through the trees, I saw beams of light cutting the darkness, lanterns, flashlights. Shapes moved, hunting. A dog's growl rolled toward us like a small, evil thunder. This is it, I thought. This is where it ends. But fate, that unpredictable commander, gave us one more chance. A gust of wind blew more snow from the branches above. The flakes swirled thickly, confusing shapes and smells. A guard cursed, a dog whined. The search party moved slightly to our right, their lights sweeping the trees just beyond our hiding place. For long minutes we lay there, frozen, afraid even to breathe. My fingers dug into the snow, feeling nothing. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Finally, the sounds began to fade. The barking moved further away toward the east. Pavel's face appeared near mine, pale as the snow. "They think we went straight," he whispered. "We go the other way." We crawled at first, then rose and walked, then half ran. No one spoke. No one had the strength for words. Hours passed, or it felt like hours. At some point, we found the creek, a blackened line where the snow was thinner, water whispering under ice. "We follow it upstream," Petrov said. "It will confuse the dogs, and somewhere up there, if God still remembers us, we might find people." "People?" I croaked. "What people?" "Partisans," he said simply. The word was another small spark of hope in the darkness. We walked until walking felt like a punishment. The snow turned to a blur beneath our feet. My thoughts became fragments. Anna, Mikhail, warm soup, a bed, the camp, the sign over the gate. At some point, Oleg stumbled and didn't get up. Stepan and I grabbed him under the arms, dragging him forward. "I can't," Oleg gasped. "Leave me, I'll only slow you down." "Shut up," Stepan snarled, tears streaming from his eyes. "We didn't crawl under bullets to leave you in the snow like garbage." We dragged him. The night seemed endless. Then, as the first hint of gray seeped into the sky, we heard a sound that froze all of us in place. A voice, not German, Russian. "Halt! Hands up!" Chapter 16, Partisans. We stopped, raising our hands slowly. Shapes emerged from the trees ahead. Men in worn coats, some in mixed uniforms, some in civilian clothes, all holding rifles steady. Their eyes were hard, suspicious, but there was something familiar in their posture, in the way they held their weapons. "Who are you?" one of them barked. "Talk, or we shoot." Pavel stepped forward as far as he dared, hands still raised. "Former Red Army," he said hoarsely. "Prisoners, escaped from a German camp. We're unarmed. We seek our own." The man who had spoken approached slowly, his rifle never wavering. He looked us over one by one, our torn clothes, our hollow faces, our shaking legs. "You don't look like much of a threat," he said dryly. He lowered his rifle slightly, but his eyes remained wary. "Which unit were you with?" he asked. We told him. "Who was your commander? Where did you fight? When were you captured?" He fired questions like bullets. Pavel answered calmly, precisely. There was no deception. Lies were too heavy for us to carry now. After a while, the man nodded. He lowered his rifle fully. "All right," he said. "If you were Germans, you'd look better fed." He turned his head and called out, "Bring them in." We were led through the trees to a hidden camp, dugouts half buried in snow, camouflaged shelters, fires carefully shielded from the air. Men and women moved quietly, efficiently. Some wore pieces of Red Army uniforms, others had whatever clothing they could find. A woman with a scarf tied tightly around her head approached us, carrying a bucket. "Soup," she said briefly, "not much, but hot." The smell nearly brought me to my knees. I accepted the tin cup with trembling hands and sipped. It was thin broth with a few pieces of potato and something like cabbage. But to us, it was a feast. The warmth spread through my chest, a sharp contrast to the weeks of cold misery. "What's your name?" the woman asked. "Ivan." "I'm Zoya," she said. "Eat, then sleep. Questions later." We were given space in one of the dugouts, straw that seemed almost luxurious compared to the barrack bunks. I lay down, still wrapped in my coat, clutching the empty cup as if it were a treasure. For the first time since my capture, I slept without the sound of German commands in my ears. Chapter 17. Back to the fight days. In the partisan camp had a different rhythm. There was still hunger, still cold, still fear, but there was also purpose. We were no longer numbers behind wire. We were men with weapons again. At first, they did not fully trust us. We were watched, tested. Our stories were cross-checked. But when German patrols came near and we helped to drive them back, suspicion eased. I was given a rifle. The weight of it in my hands felt both foreign and familiar. I ran my fingers along the barrel, remembering the first time I had held one in training, before the war had shown me what bullets actually did to bodies. "You remember how to shoot?" Zoya asked with a faint smile. "I never forgot," I replied. Our first major operation was an attack on a supply convoy. We lay in the snow among the trees, waiting, listening for the rumble of engines. My heart beat fast, but it was a different fear now. Not the animal terror of being hunted, but the nervous, sharp-edged fear of someone about to act. When the convoy appeared, a series of trucks with German soldiers smoking in the back, we opened fire. The air filled with shouts, smoke, the crack of rifles. It was over quickly. The Germans, surprised and pinned on the narrow road, didn't stand a chance. We grabbed what we could: food, ammunition, boots, warm coats. As I rummaged through one of the trucks, my hands fell on a bundle of papers. I glanced at them and froze. Among them was a list of prisoner transports, stamped with the same code as the camp I had escaped. My camp. "Anything useful?" Pavel called out. "Information," I said, holding up the papers. That night, we sat around a small lamp in the dugout, studying them. There were dates, numbers of prisoners, references to other camps, other locations. "Here," Pavel pointed, "this shipment. That's the site where we were. It's marked as a temporary holding facility." "Temporary?" I said bitterly. It felt permanent enough to me. "Temporary," Pavel repeated, his finger moving along the lines, "because they plan to relocate or close it." His jaw clenched. "Probably once the prisoners are no longer useful." The implication hung in the air. We had escaped just in time. From then on, I fought not only for myself or my family, but for those who hadn't made it, for men like Mikhail, who would never hold his daughter again. We blew up tracks, sabotaged telephone lines, ambushed patrols. Every German truck we burned felt like a tiny fragment of justice. But justice in war is always incomplete. It has too many names to cover, too many graves to visit. Chapter 18. Homecoming. I did not see the end of the war as a grand victory parade. For me, it came quietly, like a fire that ran out of fuel. In 1944, our partisan unit linked up with advancing Red Army troops. We were absorbed back into the military machine, given uniforms, new documents, new orders. It felt strange to wear clean cloth again, to march in formation not as a prisoner, but as a soldier. But the stain of captivity clung like invisible dirt. When they processed our papers, an officer looked at my file, then at me. "You were a prisoner?" he said. "Yes, comrade captain." He made a small, disapproving sound. "You know how that is viewed." "I was captured after our unit was surrounded," I replied carefully. "I escaped and fought with partisans." He shrugged. "We'll see what the commission says." The commission was a word that hung over our heads like a low ceiling. Many former prisoners were sent to filtration camps, interrogated again, sometimes imprisoned as suspected traitors. I was lucky. Perhaps it was the partisan commander's testimony, perhaps just the chaos of wartime bureaucracy, but after a series of questions and suspicious looks, they released me. "You're free to go home," the officer said. "For now." Home. The word felt unreal. The journey back to my village took days. Trains were overcrowded, roads destroyed. Everywhere I looked, there were ruins, burned houses, broken bridges, fields scarred by shell craters. When I finally reached the outskirts of my village, my legs refused to move for a good minute. I just stood there, breath visible in the cool air, staring at the familiar shapes of houses, the crooked fence near the well, the tree where I had carved my initials as a boy. My house was still there. The roof sagged a little more than I remembered. The paint had peeled, but it stood. I walked up to the door and hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. What if she wasn't there? What if someone else opened the door? What if they had buried me in their hearts already? I knocked. For a moment, nothing. Then footsteps. The door creaked open. Anna stood there. Her hair was tied back, a few strands loose around her face. There were lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was her scent, her posture, the way her eyes widened and filled with tears. "Ivan," she whispered, as if afraid the name might scare me away. I tried to say something, but my throat closed. I nodded instead. Her hand flew to her mouth. A sob escaped her, half laughter, half cry. She stepped forward, reached out, touched my cheek with trembling fingers. "You're alive," she said. "So it seems," I managed to croak. She threw her arms around me. For a moment, my bruised, tired body forgot its pain. I held her as tightly as I dared, breathing her in, feeling the warmth of her living flesh. Behind her, a small figure peered out from behind her skirt. "My son," I whispered. He was taller than when I had left, of course. His eyes, wide and uncertain, studied my face as if trying to match it with some faded picture in his memory. "This is your father," Anna said, her voice shaking. "He came back to us." He approached slowly, then stopped, looking up at me. "Are you really my papa?" he asked. I knelt, ignoring the protest from my knees. "Yes," I said, "I am, if you'll still have me." He frowned, thinking very seriously for a moment. Then he nodded and stepped forward, letting me pull him into an embrace. I pressed my face into his hair, smelled smoke and soap. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. It was never like this. It was always worse or better or different. Reality was simpler, messier, more painful, and more beautiful than any dream. I was home, but I was not the same man who had left. Chapter 19. The ghosts that stayed peace did not mean rest. Even as we tried to rebuild, the war continued inside my head. I woke up at night, drenched in sweat, sure I was still in the barrack. Sure I could hear the guards shouting, the dogs barking, the crunch of boots on frozen ground. Sometimes, in the half-light between sleep and waking, I saw Mikhail lying on the bunk beside me, his eyes half open. "Vanya," he would whisper, "tell her." I would turn my head and see Anna sleeping next to me, our son curled up in the other room. The house was quiet. No one else was there. During the day I tried to work, rebuilding the roof, mending fences, helping neighbors patch their broken walls. My hands remembered how to hold tools instead of rifles, but something inside remained brittle. People asked me about the front, about battles, about heroism. "You must have killed many Germans," one man said, almost admiringly. I thought of the guard with the thin mustache, the officer with the glasses, the men in trucks we had ambushed, the ones who had beaten me, the ones who had passed me in the camp without even seeing me. I don't want to count, I said. Sometimes, when men in uniform came to the village, I felt my whole body tense. I expected them to say, "We made a mistake. You're not free. You belong behind wire." Instead, they asked about grain, about taxes, about quotas. I went through the motions of normal life, but the camp was always there, just behind my eyes. One day, a letter arrived. The envelope was official, the stamp crisp. My heart hammered as I opened it, half expecting an order, a summons. Inside was a certificate, commendation for courageous service with partisan units. Someone had written a note at the bottom. "Your comrades remember you." I stared at the paper for a long time. You can put a medal on a man or a scar or a stamp, but none of that changes what he sees when he closes his eyes. Chapter 20. The Promise. Kept years passed. My son grew up, left the village, started his own family. Anna and I grew old together, the war moving further away in the calendar and closer in our bones. The country marched on, new slogans, new leaders, new wars. I did not talk much about my time as a prisoner. Too many people were ready to look at me with suspicion, as if surviving were a crime. But I remembered my promise. One summer, long after the last echoes of artillery had faded, I took a train to the city I had never seen before the war. Leningrad. It had another name now on some maps, but for me, it would always be the name Mikhail had pronounced with such tenderness. I walked along the wide avenues he had described, saw the river he had loved. I passed buildings that still bore scars from the siege, pockmarked walls, faded signs warning about shelling. On a quiet street near a school, I stopped a young woman who looked about the age Mikhail's daughter might be now. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you know if there is a woman named Katya Mikhailovna who lives nearby?" She would be about this age. I described as best I could. The woman frowned, thought, then shook her head. "There are many Katyas," she said, "many Mikhailovnas. I'm sorry." I asked others. Some shrugged, some shook their heads, some walked away, uninterested in the questions of an old stranger. I did not find her. Maybe she had moved. Maybe she had changed her name through marriage. Maybe she had died in the siege like so many others. But as I stood on a bridge over the Neva, watching the water move, I spoke aloud anyway. "Katya," I said quietly, "your father loved you. He was not a traitor. He did not give up. He fought to live. He wanted more than anything to go home to you." People passing by glanced at me, then looked away. Old men talking to themselves were not a rare sight. I didn't care. I had kept my promise as best I could. Epilogue, the story told, and that, I finished, looking at the young man across the table, is how I survived, or rather, how I did not die. Survival is not the same as living. He had stopped writing halfway through. Now his pen lay on the notebook, forgotten. His eyes were wet. I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "Just don't forget." He swallowed. "Do you ever forgive them?" he asked cautiously. "The guards, the officers, those who did this?" I stared at my hands for a long moment. The scars seemed deeper in the afternoon light. "Forgiveness," I said slowly, "is a luxury for saints. I am no saint. I don't spend my days hating them. Hate is heavy. I am too old to carry it. But forgive? No. I remember. That is all?" He nodded. "Why did you decide to tell this now?" he asked, "after so many years of silence?" I thought of my dead comrades, of the men in the barracks, of Mikhail. "Because most of those who were there are gone now," I said. "Soon there will be no one left who can say, 'I saw it, I felt it, it was real.' And when no one remembers, it is as if it never happened. That cannot be allowed." He closed his notebook carefully, as if it were something fragile. "I'll write it exactly as you told me," he said. "I'll keep your name." "No," I interrupted. "The name doesn't matter. I am just one of many. Call me whatever you like. But tell them about the teacher from Leningrad. Tell them about the men who died in the snow. Tell them, above all, that we were people." He stood up, thanked me, and left. The house grew quiet again. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, children's voices drifted from the street. Laughter, running feet, the distant call of a mother. I shuffled to the window and looked out. The world was peaceful. No sirens, no barking dogs, no shouted commands in German. In the glass I saw my own reflection, an old man with tired eyes. Behind him, just for a moment, I thought I saw another figure, thin, with sharp cheekbones and serious eyes. A man from Leningrad. "Did I do well, teacher?" I whispered. In my mind I heard his voice, warm and faintly amused. "You kept your promise, Vanya. That is all that is asked of any of us." I smiled, just a little. Then I turned away from the window, walked back to the table and sat down, my hands resting on the wood. The scars no longer felt quite as heavy. My story at last had been told, and somewhere, I hoped, a small spark in the darkness stayed lit a little while longer.